Welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, a podcast by Dungeon Masters for Dungeon Masters. I am Dungeon Master Shay.
And I'm Dungeon Master Kyle.
Kyle, how you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself, sir?
Man, it's another day in somebody's paradise.
There you go. That's a good way to think about it. Everybody somewhere is no matter what your situation is, there's somebody who's in paradise right now. It's kind of like the 5 o'clock somewhere saying, but it's like someone's in Hawaii. It's just not you.
Yeah, I used to say, there's probably somebody on a beach with a Mai Tai in their hand saying, "Dang, I should have gone to work today." Said no one.
Yeah,
ever.
I don't think that's like there's somebody on the golf course who wishes they were in the office. Not.
No, never.
I've never once thought that when I was on the golf course.
I will say this though, I would rather play D&D for 20 hours than ever have to go back to work.
Oh, so. Yeah. Like, hey, do you want to have fun playing your favorite hobby for nearly a full day or go work? I think all of our listeners would agree that we'd rather play D&D or, our tabletop RPG of choice.
Well, welcome, listeners. Welcome back to this week's installment of the Dungeon Master Talk podcast. We are super appreciative that you have spent time with us this week. If you would do us a favor and subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already on your favorite platform of choice, that would really help us boost this podcast up in the algorithms, as well as just help to grow the DMT community. And if you haven't already and you feel led to, please leave us a 5-star review. We do read all of those. We read all of the emails that come in, and we try to get back to you as fast as we can when we see those. We would just really love to get in touch with you and get a pulse for what this community is thinking. Hey, Kyle, so last time we talked was kind of in the middle of that big debacle with the OGL, and I know listeners are probably really tired of hearing about it for like the last 30 days.
Yeah, the like solo talking point of the community.
I will say this though, like I found it interesting that our episode dropped on Friday the 27th, and within about 8 hours of our episode dropping, there was a massive change on that.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say that it was because of us.
Definitely not.
That this happened.
I can almost guarantee you that it was not us.
I would like to think that it was because we dropped our episode about it, but unfortunately we can't take all the credit. Kyle, do you want to give us that update on what has been going on and the successful change in the OGL conversation?
Yes. So listeners, last time, we were asking you to get on that survey and fill it out to what you thought was best. And it sounds like enough of us did that. And again, we're not taking any sort of credit. There's lots of people covered it way more than us. We like to have fun and joke. But basically, the outcome is best case scenario for us. D&D is not going to de-auth the original OGL 1.0A.
Whoop, whoop.
Yep, that's good news for content creators and all of us players looking to keep content alive for the game and keeping it open for people to keep creating those awesome adventures, awesome editions, awesome podcasts, live plays, what have you, about the game of Dungeons and Dragons. So this is purely good right there. And then the second piece of cool news is Creative Commons is not going away. And so definitely look into that yourself. I think this was really the best case outcome. Was that D&D realized, and by D&D I mean Wizards of the Coast Hasbro, realized that the great power that they had here was the community, and that the community was willing to seek other games if this game was no longer going to be friendly for the community. And so hopefully that means going forward their content will continue to be community centric. I don't think from their standpoint there was ever an intent to ditch the community, but there was an intent to further capitalize there. Hopefully this is better for all involved. The community can remain strong and we can keep getting that community driven content. So in my opinion, this was best case. We'd still love to hear your guys' thoughts. Also, I for one am going to remain more vigilant about this sort of thing that I used to pay no attention to, in all honesty.
Yeah, it never even occurred to me until this whole thing broke out.
Right, and so I'm also paying a lot more attention to like, hey, is this book I'm buying, is it by a community content creator? And if so, how can I support them more? That's stuff that like I didn't realize how much of what I had was not straight from Wizards of the Coast. And so with all this and realizing it was eye-opening to me and hopefully eye-opening to more out there that like, hey, A lot of what we love about this game was given to us by others who love this game. And the big thing, like Shay said, is that wasn't that, like, that core idea, that core philosophy, the core drive behind the community wasn't going to go away. It just might have changed look. But here now, this is really best case scenario. So hopefully out of this, you may have been exposed to more games you may love, or further solidified that D&D is your home, and everything turned out good, and so you feel comfortable staying there.
Oh, absolutely. And just to really drive back home, I'm really glad for Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, that they actually did take the feedback and they did something really constructive with it. Even though, yeah, shots were fired and there was the whole calamity with the OGL, like I'm glad that they actually took the response well. They took the criticism, whether it was on purpose, intentionally or not, and they did something about it. They did something about it fairly quickly enough to try and retain the face of the game and to let that community still thrive in a way that will, as we go with them again, to build that trust back up and to really have their pulse on what the community is thinking and how they're playing the game.
Yeah, and that's a big thing out of this, guys, listeners, everyone. I think they really saw that, like, hey, the community needs to have a voice, and that's powerful. Now, the trust, obviously, that's been shaken a little bit. It's going to have to be, like Shay said, rebuilt. And so it's going to be interesting to see over this next course of year. This podcast, though, we're not going to try to be that community voice or that main pipeline of information for you guys. Our core purpose has been and will be to continue to try to empower those behind the screen, whether that screen be the physical DM screen, GM screen, or a not even actual existent one, but you're playing that role at the table or over the virtual tabletop. We want to empower you, help you get better in those scenarios, help us grow and get better too. We don't have it all figured out. So that's what we're going to do. But if there's more big news, we'll continue to make sure that you guys are aware of it. We don't want to hide anything. We just think that there's other sources out there that are already covering it and covering it more frequently than we would. We want to, be adjacent to that, but stay true to our core vision here on this podcast.
For sure. Speaking of our core tenets on this podcast, what are we going to be talking about today, Kyle?
Well, Shay, it's really fitting because I know for a fact you don't have notes.
I don't.
Today's topic is improv. So, and listeners, before all of you turn off the podcast because you don't need to prep for improv. Not true. Not true in the role of the Dungeon Master. I would argue that a good 70 to 80% of what you're actually going to do on game day is try to improv in line with your original plan. And the reason why...
Until that curveball comes, yep, pretty much.
Yep. So really, what this topic really is, I know I threw us off by just saying the topic's improv. It's raining outside, go. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how do you plan to improv? How do you plan to shift? Because I think that's really a skill that every DM, regardless of your story, regardless if you're coming from an entirely homebrewed campaign or a entirely store-bought campaign, one thing that both of those scenarios have in common is you're going to have to improv. If you're running a one-off session, you're going to still probably have to improv. And I'm saying probably because I'm sure somebody out there could tell me that they once wrote an entire session and it followed it. Good on you, but that's not going to be the standard.
That would be like a 1 in a zillionth chance that would actually happen, though.
Oh, exactly.
And not only that, your players really, really well.
Yeah. That did not happen in your first week of DMing that group.
No.
And it didn't happen in your first year, most likely, unless you were playing daily, in which case I am insanely jealous. Insanely jealous.
That is a lot of D&D.
It is a lot of D&D. So, with that in mind, let's think about this. Again, we're approaching this, listeners, we're going to try to help out brand new DMs, but hopefully there'll be advice in here that can help DMs of any experience level. And we're going to preface this and end with this as well. If you have thoughts on this topic, please let us know on our social medias or on our email. We love hearing from you guys. It really does mean the world. And who knows, we might shout you out on here. So first of all, Shay, for you, I think that this is there's different ways we could talk about this. There's improv with combat. There's improv with the NPCs. There's improv with they wanted to go somewhere you didn't plan on. What's the area that you think, as a new DM, you struggled the most with?
Option D, yes. Because
that didn't go how expected.
See, there's your improv right there.
Yep.
Because here's the thing. When you're a brand, especially for new brand DM, especially for brand new DMs,
new brand DMs. Now you have to keep it in because I referenced it.
We're going to trademark that. New brand DMs. I think it can be daunting. Now, some people have that personality type that you can literally walk onto a stage, give a very thespianistic performance, and not have even looked at the script at all. And people would believe every single word.
Yep.
There are some of us that would hide behind any kind of music stand or sheet music or anything like that and go, yikes. So part of it, you have to kind of understand your personality, and you have to understand how you prepare for things like this. Because when you think about it, as a DM, you're kind of giving a performance, even though you have outside help.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. It's kind of an improv show with outside help. And you have to be able to set the tone, you set the stage, and you set the surroundings and the emotions for people to walk in and experience that with you, right? So I think when you're doing that, it's really important that you understand the part of the world that you're in and maybe the surrounding area to where you are. And I say that because what that's going to do is if somebody says, I walk off this direction, you can have kind of a tile to kind of lead them, keep the story going, but you can kind of walk with them as they walk out of your town that you've been in for a day and a half, right?
Yep.
Having a list of, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but the more you can understand the world that you've built, or if you're doing a pre-gen, the better you can study that book and really immerse yourself in that book and get into that, like, godlike mind. I built this world. Even though you didn't actually physically build
you're
it, like
in charge of it.
In your head, you're like, okay, I built this world. I put the mountains over here. I put this city here, blah, 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 blah. So you really have that understanding of the world and everything that goes into it, even if it is just a very small part of your world at that particular time.
Yeah. And I think listeners here, what Shay's really talking about is a lot of it's the magic's in the prep. Thinking back to those people who they can rattle off grand speeches in the moment, they can put on a performance. It's not their first rodeo most of the time. So then how for us that it is our first rodeo, how do we do it? A lot of that it is in the pre-work, trying to have that understanding. But then there's there's also a secret sauce to, if you make a decision in the spur of the moment, the key is to track that decision. You have to keep that decision in some form of notes for you. Whether that
never negate your premise.
Exactly. Yep. And the big thing with D&D that I found to be true is consistency with that. So if, like, say you're in the town of Havencroft, and north of Havencroft you didn't map out, but your players say, we're leaving the town north. And so you're like, all right, you're going through a marshland. But then the next time your characters are in Havencroft and they head north and you're now in a desert, whoa, you've just broken my immersion. What happened? Our characters have been gone weeks, not centuries. How this changed? So how do you avoid that in that scenario where you made a spur-of-the-moment decision? It's now been months of real time, weeks of game time. How do you track that? The key there is to make notes about that decision. So if you're making a decision like that, that's going to be your world, that needs to now go into your world-building binder or your world-building notes, something like that. So that way your next time you're not improving again, you are referencing your previous notes. Something that I use that really helps me with that is Trello. It's a free service that if anybody's ever worked Jira, same company does Trello. If you haven't, you have vertical lanes and you make cards, you can move them through the lanes. I have a board for my NPCs. I have a board now for my world locations. And that way, if I spur the moment make up an NPC that I'm like, they're going to encounter this NPC again, I try to get it on my Trello board as soon as possible so that I don't forget this NPC. The problem that I have right now is going back, I didn't always used to do that. So stuff from year one of the campaign, that's harder for me to reference and riff off of now because I've moved to this new setup. So I'm much better with the more recent stuff, like the last 4 or 5 months, probably more like 6-7 months now of the campaign. I'm a lot better at referencing and riffing off of because I moved to this Trello board. So that's something I recommend. Not necessarily that product but something similar, whatever works for you. It can be handwritten, but just a way that you can fly to it and find your stuff. So that way in the future, you're not improving what you already improved before.
And something else I think that you can do to help you prepare for that is, okay, like take your example, right? You're in Havenloft, right?
Havencroft.
And your people go... Havencroft, sorry. You're in Havencroft and your people say, okay, we're going to go north. Okay, well, we said this is a swampland. In the back of your head, have an idea of, okay, what things live in a swampland?
Yoda.
The Yonti.
Yeah, big
Bullywog.
Swamp Thing.
Swamp people.
Yeah, he's listing
Duck Dynasty. Yeah. I mean,
so like you can run into slime out there. You can run into bats, giant spiders.
Oh my.
Yeah, oh my. So like what type of creatures can you run into for this interaction? A cool thing to do in these type of moments, typically your characters are in search for something. So you can actually, as a DM, kind of have your players create the scenarios even though they don't realize it. And that's through that active conversation and world building. So you lay out the where. You're laying out the where. We're in this swampland, this marsh, if you will. And then have them like, what are they searching for? Are they just trying to travel through it? Well, then here's your chance for a surprise encounter. If they're hunting for something, well, here's your chance to introduce some weirdness into your campaign to take up their fun. Maybe an NPC that's a super eccentric and he's lived in the swamp and this is his first human interaction in decades. And he doesn't even know how to communicate with people anymore.
Or it could be like he was hunted by humans.
Yeah.
And the first human he sees, he's going to go ape on him.
Yep. And this is also like a great opportunity if we're in a marshland to introduce a different take on a druid, because we're used to running into druids in heavy forested areas. So then we're in the swampland. There's still a lot of plant life. There's still plenty of opportunity for druid here, but it's just a little little anti-typical of where we're gonna run into this. And then also, like beyond that, like we're still kind of trending. Oops, I hit my mic there. Sorry, listeners. We're still thinking like combat wise. This could also be a chance, harking back to previous episode, to introduce some weird items if they're attentive enough.
Yep.
And so this is a chance where you can introduce some magical items that maybe you've been looking for the opportunity to Magic Swampland. Just saying.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, you get the Sword of Swamp and
or like
gives you
the shoes that let you walk on water. The cloak that lets you hold your breath. Like, it's not where they'd expect to find it necessarily, but it's still a place that'd be relevant to.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things, Kyle, at least for me in my experience, that I struggle with on the improv is names.
Oh, hardcore.
You know, like if you need a name for an NPC
Bob.
Or a name for a tavern or whatever. So something I've done, and it's similar to what you have with your Trello. I actually have my OneNote that I keep all my notes in for my campaign, but I have an Excel sheet for it's literally a book of names. That's literally what it is. That's what I've called it. And I have it tabbed by race, by tavern, by like, it's just rows and rows and rows. Now, what I have done as a prep is I've gone to like random name generators, like fantasy name generator, and I've tried to think of like random fantasy names that I could use for specific races and things like that too. But I'll just write them down.
Yep.
And just have this nice list. And depending on where they end up, let's say they end up on a coastal, say they end up in a port city. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Port city. You know, if they end up in a port city, you know, they can end up at a tavern called the Thirsty Octopus. Yep. You know, it could be something like fish out of water or, you know, whatever, and run with that.
The Empty Hook or something like that.
That's just a bad fisherman, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's, well, what was it that Off the Hook, and there was another place, and you guys thought Off the Hook would have seafood. I was like, no, this is the food that you don't need to get on the hook.
Wasn't that the candy shop?
No, Off the Hook, like you guys got to eat like a ball of meat and...
Oh, that's right. That's right.
For some reason, my world didn't call it meatballs. I think that's just me being goofy in the moment. But also off of that, I do have a book that was gifted to me by one of my players that I absolutely love. It is a book of NPCs. And basically what this book has done is it's taken the difficulty of like trying to come up with it out of an NPC and instead given you the opportunity to look for one in this book that fits your needs. And they have it sorted by different categories and stuff like that so you can fly to it. So stuff like that, that's another example of that community. So I'm harking back to OGL talk earlier. That community created content. But this book, what's cool about it is it's not specific to D&D. You could use it with Pathfinder. It's more giving you the ideas. Like Pathfinder, Powered by the Apocalypse games, any of those, it's just going to give you a character with a background and some motivations and some ideas for how to roleplay them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing and probably the point to drive really home with this episode is if the more you can prep ahead of time, the easier your improv is going to come.
Yep.
I think that's really the nuts and bolts of it.
But then also with that, everyone, pre-prep, that's great. Not everything is pre-preppable. So what we're really like, what we're kind of dance around without saying it, a lot of what helps is knowing the motivations of the people in your area, knowing the area. But then if you don't have to be, I think there's this expectation on DMs that we can rattle off a scenario in 10 seconds flat. There is nothing wrong with stalling for a moment. Most play groups, I'd say 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5 play groups, they're going to be okay with some crosstalk amongst each other. There's going to be some scenario that's already happened or two people that haven't talked to each other for a while. So it's okay to take 10 minutes even to set up your scenario. Do not pressure yourself to answer it as fast as what you do here on some live plays. Again, no shade at live plays, but a lot of them are edited to make it more pleasing for you. What you're losing out of most of them is that time where you're looking stuff up or where you're creating your map or where you are determining this character. Now,
at least for the podcast versions of them, sometimes with the live streams, those are probably going to take a little bit more time. Probably won't edit that quite as much, but
so like those are more in line with you actually get to see. So watching those is fun. I love both personally, and I want to preface all this by saying I listen to live plays and love them, absolutely love them.
Yeah.
So again, it's okay to take some time. Every one of us has our strengths. I personally think that the improv side of things, actual coming up with the scenario in the spot, is not something that I've struggled with. Remembering what I came up with is, hence why my sessions are recorded and I keep all these notes so that I can go back and figure out what I did that was off the script because my player surprised me or because things went fast or in the moment I decided, you know what, that doesn't sound as fun now as it sounded before.
I was going to say, and for those of us who don't record your sessions, I do personally because my attention span sometimes is about that fast.
100%.
But if you are a table group that does not have recording equipment on the table, write it down. Make yourself a quick, take like 10 seconds, write yourself a quick sticky note or have like just a blank sheet of paper to randomly jot down stuff that you need. And then after that session, put that back into your notes where you see fit. So that way you can go back and use that prep time efficiently.
Don't be afraid to leverage your players too. It's okay to outside a session when you're prepping for the next one to go, hey, do you remember the name of that guy you encountered on the road and you asked him about X? And you can throw people off, like be testing them this way, but it's okay. It's a group storytelling experience. I do recommend to try to get that note down yourself as fast as possible. That way your players aren't like, oh, where are his notes? Because then they might start trying to mess with you.
Right.
Occasionally double checking with them was like, hey, like, do you remember? Like, stuff like that is fine.
Yeah. Make sure you have the answer ready to go. But when you ask those questions, it's good to ask them every now and again just to make sure you've got that engagement going in your game, I think.
I heavily encourage all my players to keep their own notes. And I think that's something all DMs should do. And it really, because to the players, if we nail this, they won't know what was improv and what wasn't.
Nope.
Sometimes I like to keep them guessing. There's some stuff that I totally improv that they think I was a planning genius for. And there's some stuff I planned for that they thought was improv, and that's why it was a little rough. I don't like to unveil the curtain too often on those if I can help it. But it's probably closer to 50-50 than what a lot of my players realize. And that's because a lot of the times you get, like, I'll be pre-planning. And I was incredibly guilty of overly pre-planning, especially in my first year. I wrote books effectively of what I wanted to happen, and within 10 minutes would have to be throwing half of it out. And so my group... Go ahead, Jay.
Listeners, there was one time he actually had a lighter for half the book that he was going to use, and he just set it on fire. And we're like, what are you doing? He's like, forget this. We're just going to do something else. Okay, that's not true. That's not true.
I didn't have a lighter because I would never start a fire in my old house. I have ripped in front of my party before, just taken my notes and ripped them and let them go. Sometimes it's to be dramatic, though, if I'm being real. But
it's true. Hey, every now and again, it's okay to throw a bunch of paper in the air and just say, whatever.
Yeah. Honestly, though, coming back to, like, how do you improv? Like, it's okay to let the dice make some decisions. My shield that Shay gifted me has some random scenarios that you can dice roll to determine. There's a lot of virtual tabletops out there that if you're just like, you know what, we need an encounter now, you can click on an encounter button and it'll come up with some. The recommendation I have is vet that, double check that the scenario it comes up with makes sense for your area that your party's in. For example, if they're in a very high-to-do city, goblins coming out of nowhere and attacking them is not going to make a lot of sense. Ruffians might, depending on where you're at. Maybe it's more likely that guards take issue with where they're at. Or maybe the villain of the story makes an appearance, and if they engage with him here, they will get the attention of the guard or whatever local police force is. So that scenario that you're coming up with, those random generators, they don't know what your players are doing and where they're at, per se. So I do recommend vet that. Make sure the scenario is valid and not one that we're going to be like, that felt strange. Like, why did these giant spiders come down from the roof of this super clean cathedral?
Right. One other thing, and just as a slight deviant, sometimes as DMs, we need to improvise the rules.
Yep.
Because there are certain situations or things that your player might want to do that the book doesn't necessarily talk about. And the biggest thing with that is it's okay as the DM to make it up. As we talked about in house rules, that's kind of part of our job, is to be an interpreter of the rules for your game. But also if you're, let's just say for the sake of argument, your fighter says, I want to parkour up this wall, and he's wearing like heavy plate armor. And with heavy plate armor, dexterity is about as oxymoronic as jumbo shrimp, but I digress.
Doesn't mean it's impossible for him to do it. Harder.
No.
Much harder.
Or let's that might be a little bit more bland of an example, but
it's fine.
Like, just picture something outrageous, that your player wants to do, and that's fine, but you just might have to consult the rules or have an interpretation of the rules. As long as you're consistent with it, I think you'll be okay. And like the book says, these are guidelines. These are for your group to have a guideline for your game. If they don't work, if you need to modify, please feel free to 100%. Do so. And that just keep that in the back of your mind if it comes to improvising or making a call on the fly of the rules. Now, if it's one of those things like you say, okay, X scenario happens, and then you go back and you think about it and you say, okay, after you've studied it, say, okay, this probably wasn't the best interpretation, but just on the fly, if you feel led to make a decision, make that decision, and then double check yourself if you have to change it afterwards. And for the next session, that's fine. Yeah, that's more where I was kind of going with that is, don't be afraid to improv the rules as long as you are consistent and fair.
There was one time in my session, Shay cast hold person on an owlbear. I didn't catch that he said hold person and not hold monster. I allowed it. And it made this fight.
Well, and to be fair, I didn't have hold monster as my spell. Right. I just had hold person.
And this was really the first time in a while that we were fighting something that wasn't a person. The first time in a while that we were fighting a true monster. So he had cast hold person a couple times before and it worked. And so honestly, at this point, I think we had gotten a little numb to it. And so it happened.
Yep.
And they finished up the fight. It was significantly easier because we held person on a monster. Then we realized it. And so in the moment, Shay even offered the owlbear can be back up. We could give it back some health points. But we had progressed in the fight. The scenarios had changed. There was a lot of decisions made that would have been different if this owlbear was still up. So I, as the DM in the moment, said, no, it's still down. We're just going to move on. We moved on. We finished combat. Then afterwards, talking with my party, I was like, hold person, hold monster are different spells. Going forward, we're going to treat them correctly. I did not want to retcon that much in that big of a fight. And so that was the...
Oh, yeah. That would have been a ton of retcon.
Yeah, so that was me improving the rules there. I was like, nah, in the moment, we're going to roll with our mistake. Going forward, we'll try really hard not to make that mistake again. But like I said, it wasn't that we didn't know Hold Monster was a spell, and we didn't know the difference between Hold Person and Hold Monster. We had gotten numb to it. It was like, this was time number like 25. Shay was going to hold person on something. And so I didn't check it. He didn't check it. We made it. Oops. We improv'd it. Yeah. It worked out. And so that's really the more common type of, like, there's two really common type of improvs. There's going to be we need a rule decision now. We're in a flow. I don't want to look. Or we made it. Oops. How do we handle it? Go. And then there's also the improv where it's like, all right, I didn't expect my players to be here. I didn't expect them to want to do this. How do I handle it? And there's different prep for those. There's one of those you can, if you've DM'd before, you might think to cover it in your session 0. Like, hey, how are we going to handle mess ups? Odds are, though, you didn't discuss that, because even though I'm being DMing for a while now, when I started my new group, I didn't talk about that with them. Now I'm thinking, hey, maybe should have. But that one's kind of like, you on the fly it, and then just be transparent with your decision. And if your players take your players into account. I could tell my group didn't want to revert the combat overall. And so they were all happy with that decision. I knew each person really well. If I didn't know them as well, I would have had more of a conversation around it. It wouldn't have been as quick of a decision. Mm-hmm. But then for the other prep, like the other improv where it's an NPC you didn't know they were going to talk to, or a location you didn't expect them to go to. A big thing there, like we're saying, know your world or make use of tools out there. There are random map generators, topography generators. So if you're not strong at making that, know there are tools to help you out there.
Yep. And if we can find some free links, I'll try and throw those in the description too, so you guys have some reference
resources
to, some free sources that you can use for your games and have some more help in that area. But yeah, I think Kyle, just to kind of wrap this up for our listeners, really with improv, it sounds oxymoronic, like the more you prep, the better you improv. It really does. But at the same time, when you think about it, the better prepared you are, the better you will be able to roll with the punches as they come in, because you'll know the basis for the world and what you're trying to do in that world.
And also, players, the more you DM, just the more you get to know your party, it gets easier. The first session, improving, it feels hard. It feels daunting. Because suddenly you're like, oh, I didn't prep. You'll suddenly realize the areas you didn't pay attention to in prep. No, you're far from being alone. We've all been there. Every DM can tell you the story of we went, like your druid could disguise the whole party, ruin your entire sneak attack plan. Or the like your party suddenly, like when you had a all players good campaign, they suddenly start having some infighting anyway, and you have an entire session where you as a DM just sit back and observe your party talk. And then you're trying to decide how to make that fit. You're trying to decide how to motivate them to keep going. Those are the stuff that it is hard to prep for. But know that the more you DM, the more you get used to that type of scenarios, and the more you see them and interact with them, it does get easier to improv. So 2 years from now is going to feel much more comfortable with your improv than you today. But hopefully our conversation today helped you out and helped bridge that gap a little bit.
For sure. Well, hey, everyone, thank you so much again for joining us this week. We tell you all the time, and we really, really do mean it. We do value you guys downloading this podcast. We value your guys' input. We value your guys' time. And we just really appreciate that you spend some of that time with us every time we drop an episode. So If you would like to get in contact with us, maybe tell us the time that you got caught and you had to be an improving master, or maybe you were able to prepare for your session so well that you didn't even have to think about your improv. Let us know on our email at dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. Hit us up on Facebook. We have the Facebook Dungeon Master Talk page, and hit us up on Twitter. We've got the hashtag Dungeon Master Talk, as well as we are at DMT the podcast. Y'all, we would really just love to talk with you and share your stories and maybe some other stories that we've got that we haven't been able to talk about on this show today. So that being said, for all of us here at DMT, I am Shay.
And I'm Kyle.
We will see you next time on Dungeon Master Talk.
Bye, guys.